Statement 2 of Gongchik. Jigten Sumgon maintains that the Bodhisattva vows have a foundation. So this statement was made because they're, in studying the details of this topic, different opinions circulated regarding whether there is something else that needs to be there first before the successful generation of bodhicitta. So there are some who said, no, doesn't need. So here, Kyobpa Rinpoche says, there is, the Bodhisattva vows, they have a foundation. So let's look at Khenpo Kunpal's commentary. Concerning the vows of the generation of bodhicitta that belong to the bodhisattvas, who are endowed with the cause, this cause, being compassion, Jigten Sumgon maintains that they do not come into being if one does not have the basis, which in this case, what is the basis? What is the foundation? It's the vows of individual liberation. Therefore, the Bodhisattva vows have a foundation. The reasoning is stated by the matchless Lord Atisha, who said, those who are continuously endowed with any of the other vows, any of the vows of the 7 types of individual liberation, they have the fortune to obtain the Bodhisattva vows, while others do not. In the middle way tradition, the refuge vows also need to come first. So one should understand that there is no contradiction. And so here in the footnote, it tells us, there are 2 traditions of receiving the Bodhisattva vows, the middle way tradition of the view and the mind-only tradition of conduct. The mind-only tradition asserts the refuge vows to be part of the vows of individual liberation. Thus, Jigten Sumgon's Vajra statement is in line with this tradition. The middle way tradition does not assert the refuge vows to be part of the vows of individual liberation, but they do assert that the refuge vows are necessary before taking the Bodhisattva vows. Thus, Khenpo Kunpal here shows that Jigten Sumgon is also in agreement with this tradition. So these are some of the ins and outs of the various debates going on in Tibet. So basically here, Jigten Sumgon is saying that the Bodhisattva vows, they arise on the basis of the individual liberation vows. So this, I think, these days, this position is not so unusual. So they're not so unusual because I think this is generally accepted. Then why Khenpo Kunpal have to say here, in the middle way tradition, the refuge vows also need to come first. And so there's no contradiction here. It's because in some ways, sometimes Kyobpa Rinpoche seems to prioritize the mind-only conduct tradition. And sometimes people think, oh, maybe he has a more inferior. Because in the arranging of the four tenet systems, there is the Vaibhashika, the Sautrantika. So the particular is the followers of Sutra, and then the mind only and the middle way. These are the 4. And it says that, in these 4, there is a progression from the more basic to the more profound. or the more preliminary to the more profound understanding of reality. So the last two belongs to the Mahayana division. The first two belong to the Hinayana division. So here, Jigten Sumgon's statement is to emphasize, anyway, it is to emphasize that in order to properly give rise to the Bodhisattva vow, you need a basis. And what is that basis? That basis is the pratimoksha, the individual liberation. So again, there are lots of finer debate, finer points that you could talk about, but I think for our purposes, we don't need to go into it. Next statement, statement 3, says, the vows of engaging bodhicitta also arise in ordinary beings. And together with that statement is the next statement. Any kind of virtue at that point then turns into the vows of engaging bodhicitta. So again, the vows of engaging bodhicitta also arise in ordinary beings. Then the next statement. And then from there, from that point on, once the vows of engaging bodhicitta has arisen in anyone, then any kind of virtuous actions, they turn into the fulfilling or the practicing of the vows of engaging bodhicitta. Now, what is going on here? First, 4.3. The vows of bodhicitta also arises in ordinary beings. Now, this is because, then maybe to us, we're like, really? Why is this a problem? Why does there need to be such a statement? Because elsewhere, again, in these, very scholastic, very intellectually based, very, like scrutinizing all the different texts, the different sutras, the different shastras, and all of that, there is a common explanation, which again, among the very schooled, the Khenpos and the Geishas, they know this, but they don't necessarily teach this in the West in this way, except in some rare cases. But it's a common view. And what am I talking about? So with regards to relative bodhicitta. So first, the biggest or the first level of division of bodhicitta can be divided into relative bodhicitta and absolute bodhicitta. Relative bodhicitta is the vow. Yesterday we saw, the definition given by Maitreya, right? And so what did Maitreya say? He says, generating bodhicitta is the aspiration for perfect, complete awakening for the sake of others, right? So that is relative bodhicitta. What is relative bodhicitta? Relative bodhicitta is generating bodhicitta. What is relative bodhicitta? The aspiration for perfect, complete awakening for the sake of others. For the sake of others, that comes from having cultivated love and compassion for all beings. Aspiration for perfect, complete awakening comes from cultivating wisdom. That's relative bodhicitta. Ultimate bodhicitta is the realization of the nature of all phenomena, the nature of the mind. So these are the two bodhicittas. So for example, or if you want to look at briefly these two, the mind training in 7 points. Point number 2 gives instructions on how to cultivate relative bodhicitta and ultimate bodhicitta. This is the first 5 lines in the second point pertains to how to cultivate ultimate bodhicitta. And then the last 5 lines of point number 2, altogether there are 10 lines there, pertains to how to cultivate relative bodhicitta. Here, relative bodhicitta is further divided into aspiration and engagement. And so this is what is going on here. And this is here it's saying, as for relative bodhicitta, regarding the vows of engagement bodhicitta or action bodhicitta, this also arises in ordinary beings. So again, what is going on here? What is going on here is that there is a strong view, and this comes from India, not Tibetans making it up. In the Indian Buddhist scholarly text, this footnote here tells us, they assert, for example, that the vows of engaging bodhicitta are only for those who have reached the bodhisattva stages and not for ordinary beings. They say that until you reach a certain level on the bodhisattva path, engagement bodhicitta doesn't really exist. So it doesn't really exist for ordinary beings. Ordinary beings only at most have the capacity of aspiration bodhicitta. For them to actually practice the bodhisattva actions, they need to have at least to be on the first bodhisattva bhumi, which is the path of seeing, which is quite advanced. So there is this view, which we don't normally hear about this. Here, when the teachers come teach in the West, when they teach about bodhicitta, they say, oh, aspiration bodhicitta, engagement bodhicitta. Aspiration is, the desire to become Buddha. Engagement is when you then do what it needs to be done to become. But among the Khenpos and the Geishas, they very precisely, very detailed, they'll read this text, this text, and then they will say, actually, for ordinary beings, before arriving at the state of the first bhumi, before attaining the path of seeing, whatever we practice, they're not exactly the engagement bodhicitta. And they have their reasons, But here Jigten Sumgon disagrees. Here Jigten Sumgon says, the vows of engaging bodhicitta also arises in ordinary beings. And in Khenpo Kunpal's commentary, he doesn't explain it any further. He simply says, this is the position of both Atisha and Shantideva. So if we want to look at another source to help us, look at this again in more detailed. Here, again, actually, even in Chodra's long commentary, He gets into quoting and this text and that text and this text and that text, basically to say, those of you who say that engagement bodhicitta doesn't arise until, when you're fairly advanced, when you're on the path of seeing, when you're on the first bodhisattva bhumi. Basically, in Choda's commentary, it's just quoting this sutra, this shastra, that commentary. I think for us, the take-home lesson here is, I think all of us will think, oh, wow, no, aspiration and engagement bodhicitta, both you should practice. Everybody can practice. Yes, I think for us, when we read this Vajra statement, we think, oh, that's such a like cop out, to say, oh, not possible, engaging in bodhisattva practices. We should just aspire. Oh, may I become bodhisattva? May I become bodhisattva? Most of us will recognize that attitude, or will think that attitude is, don't be like that. And most of us have that attitude because our idea of what bodhisattva activity is actually very limited also. That's why we don't think it's so impossible for us to do as ordinary beings. Because our concept, actually, of bodhisattva activity, bodhisattva path, and therefore the Buddha state, is very limited actually. Yes, we say things like, oh, Buddha is without limit, Buddha is without, right? But just on lips, we really cannot fathom, how amazing bodhisattva activities. Right? So then we think, oh, of course, engagement bodhicitta. Of course, it applies to us ordinary beings. Now, having said that, we should also not. The other error is to think, bodhisattva path is so amazing, it's so profound, until, right, doesn't apply to me. Or so profound until, oh, I can only aspire to become Buddha. Actually engaging in bodhisattva activity, oh, no, not possible. Until, light comes out from my head, I cannot help others. Of course, the other view, like I said, is the naive view that, I can help. You need help? You need help? But then we end up, right, instead of helping, just complicating and controlling. Sometimes we want to help others. Actually, we want to control others. And then we say, we want to help you. Especially parents, careful with that, I want to help you. Actually, I want to control you. Yes, of course, out of care, out of, compassion, so to say, but that compassion, again, elsewhere, Jigten Sumgon will discuss in more detail and say, be careful that compassion is not arising from self-grasping. So we need to have this kind of both this appreciation and this caution to ourselves, like, bodhisattva path is not so simple, not so easy, profound, its implications. But at the same time, we also need to have confidence and say, no, of course, engagement bodhicitta arises also in ordinary beings. We can help. We can benefit beings. So following from that statement, the next statement says, and once this resolve, right? After all, that vow, right? The vow of engagement bodhicitta is saying, and I shall practice virtuous deeds of body, speech, and mind at all times. from now until this time tomorrow, from now until the end of this life, from now until enlightenment is achieved, which is the second recitation that we do when we open our practices. So that is the engagement bodhicitta vow, right? From now until this time tomorrow, I will engage in virtuous deeds of body, speech, and mind. From now until the end of this life, I will engage in virtuous deeds of body, speech, and mind. From now until Buddhahood is achieved, I shall engage in virtuous deeds of body, speech, and mind. Here is based on this Vajra statement, which is Jigten Sumgon says, once you have given rise to that daring, that brave thought, that brave resolve, then all the acts of virtue that you create, they become the fulfillment of that commitment, which is engagement bodhicitta vow. Here in the language that is used, sometimes it's a little bit less precise than I would like it. Now, my complaints. I think we need to differentiate between giving rise to the resolve to go into bodhisattva acts of benefiting others, giving rise to the resolve, and fulfilling the resolve. So I think the opposing position is not literally saying you cannot give rise to the resolve of engaging in bodhisattva acts. It's saying you cannot yet act in that way. So at most you can just give rise to the resolve. But Jigten Sumgon, I believe in statement 2, is saying, no. Not just you can give rise to that resolve to engage in bodhisattva actions, but you can now fulfill that resolve. Because once you have given rise to that resolve, then even simple ordinary actions of giving like one morsel of food to an ant becomes part of fulfilling the engagement bodhicitta vow. So here is to say, don't think, oh, I'm not on the first bhumi yet. So any good that I do, it's just ordinary mundane good. 4.3 is saying, no. From that point on, after you have given rise to the resolve to cultivate engagement bodhicitta, then all your acts of virtue, all your positive, skillful actions, they are no longer just on the level of individual liberation. They have now become for the benefit of all beings. And so, 4.4, the commentary, Khenpo Kunpal, furthermore, it is the Buddha's domain of activity to have the 3 types of discipline completely perfect and final, which is the discipline of restraint, the discipline of gathering virtuous qualities, and the discipline of benefiting sentient beings. So these 3, right, they sound very similar to another set of 3. A more famous quote, like not to engage in misdeeds, not to engage in negativity, not to engage in negative karma, to cultivate all acts of virtue, and to tame the mind. This is the teaching of all Buddhas. Here is a slight modification. Here it says the discipline of restraint, the discipline of gathering virtues, and the discipline of benefiting beings. This is said to summarize. Bodhisattva practices are infinite. The 10,000, so to say, bodhisattva practices, the 6 perfections, and so on and so forth. they can be summarized into the disciplined conduct of restraint, restraining ourselves from acting unskillfully, restraining ourselves from creating non-virtue. The discipline of gathering virtues, in other words, the discipline of engaging in skillful actions, actions that are productive of happiness for self and others. Then the discipline of directly benefiting beings. This is said to be the three aspects of bodhisattva discipline, bodhisattva conduct. Here it says, Khenpo Kunpal says, and Buddhas are able to completely do this with no obstacle, no issue. However, although this is talking about Buddhas who have the complete discipline of restraint, the discipline of gathering virtues, and the discipline of benefiting sentient beings, however, any kind of virtue, such as generosity, such as giving one morsel of food to an ant, turns into the vows of engaging bodhicitta. More specifically, turns into the vow of, turns into the fulfillment of the vows of engaging bodhicitta. So, can you give me 1 second? Okay, sorry about that. So, so any kind of virtue, such as generosity, right, turns into fulfilling the vows of engaging bodhicitta. If even as little as one prostration, in even as simple as one prostration, the three types of discipline are complete there. How? A prostration that is free from the faults of thinking of one's own sake, and so forth, fulfills the discipline of restraining from faulty conduct. A prostration with a faithful mind indeed fulfills the discipline of gathering virtuous qualities, and a prostration focusing on the benefit of others fulfills the discipline of benefiting sentient beings. Therefore, one should strive in many ways with careful awareness and without regard for one's life. So it's not saying, or maybe not, it's not saying, but we should not think, oh, I took that vow, yeah, I think last year or something like that, I took bodhisattva vow, so now everything good I do becomes bodhisattva activity. This is a little too confident. On the other hand, I think it's also saying you don't need to every time you make prostration, you think, oh, this is the discipline of restraint. Oh, this is also the discipline of gathering virtues. Oh, this is also the discipline of benefiting beings. You also don't need to be so almost like every time you do something virtuous, you think of. Then it becomes very tight. Again, two extremes. Somewhere in the middle is always remember, I have taken the engagement bodhicitta vows. I've made the resolve, to practice these three superior disciplines. Superior discipline of restraint, superior discipline to gather virtues, superior discipline of benefiting beings. All of this, I have made the resolve to cultivate. And therefore, all the virtues that I engage in should be done as a fulfillment of this engagement bodhicitta vow. Think like that. If we can remember that point, then every restraint that we practice isn't a restraint that is practiced just for ourselves. Every act of cultivating a positive, skillful state of mind, positive, skillful state action or speech, we're doing it not just for ourselves, but with an eye towards, with an attitude towards benefiting beings, fulfillment of our engagement bodhicitta vow. So this is what 4.4 is telling us. Yeah. Tomorrow we will continue. 4.5 goes in a different direction, not different direction, but 4.5 is a different set of issues. 4.5, 4.6, 4.7, 4.8, 4.9, 10. They are closely related to what is already discussed in the last chapter, which is virtue is always virtue, non-virtue is always non-virtue. All the scholastic categories, very detailed categories, can sometimes mislead us into some funny ideas, So even in, therefore, in the Bodhisattva vow, they, again, the scholars, ancient scholars even, sometimes get carried away. They talk about how certain kinds of downfall doesn't involve non-virtue, certain kinds of downfall of the Bodhisattva vow, non-virtue is involved. Jigten Sumgon just cuts to the heart of the matter. He says, the very definition of what a downfall or not a downfall is, whether it's coming from the 3 poisons or not. If it comes from the 3 poisons, then it's a downfall, then it's non-virtuous. End of discussion. It's like saying, all you guys debating all these things, like, what's the point? Yeah, so we'll look at that. Yeah, the next few statements are all applying the principle of karmic causality, which has been discussed so much in the first 3 chapters in the statements there. Now, how does this play out on the level of bodhisattva training? Basically, the next few statements pertains to that. Okay.